All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I've got 9 o'clock on my time, so we're somewhere close. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. So we're going to be in chapter 18, about verse 33 or so, and we'll work our way into chapter 19. Because if you just start with chapter 19, you're not really at a good spot. And so all of this now is still the same flow of the story. 13 through 17 are Jesus and his disciples talking, and they leave and go to the garden at the beginning of 18. That troop of soldiers, they estimate between 200 and 600 people come to get Jesus at the garden. And so it's not like in the paintings. If you've ever seen paintings of the Garden of Gethsemane where there's like 6 people who have come to arrest Jesus, right? It's a couple hundred at the minimum who have come. And this is where we've got Jesus now. He's gone before the high priest, or he's gone before Annas and Caiaphas, and now he's been brought before Pilate. And we kind of pick up with the discussion between Pilate and Jesus, continuing in verse 33. And so we'll look at this first section here, just verse 33 down through about verse 38 or so. There's that section in there where Pilate and Jesus are discussing things. What are some things that you notice in that section? And as you're thinking about what you see, if you have questions or comments, please make sure to raise your hand, and someone will bring you a microphone so that people who are joining us at home can hear you. And when you get that microphone, make sure and talk right into it. Just hold it up to your face and talk so we can hear you.
Well, just to kind of set the context of this, we've had a Jewish lynch mob come and get Christ. And Pilate is already complicit in this because he sent the soldiers with the Jewish leaders. So there's some collusion here in what's going on. And of course, this is highly illegal from the Jewish law. And it's about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning because the cocks crowed, with Peter. And so it's very early in the morning. The city's just waking up, and then all of this is starting to happen. Of course, the Jews won't go into the praetorium because they don't want to be defiled. And so when we pick up here, Jesus is with Pilate in the praetorium without the Jews. He's being, in a sense, interrogated by Pilate alone without the Jews. So it's a very, John's message of darkness and light, and it just strikes me that this is a very evil and dark thing that's going on with Jesus' arrest and in these trials before the Sanhedrin, and now the trial before Pilate. It's very dark.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, thing that's going on. Of course, this is going to happen. It's God's plan, but it's still watching this interaction with Pilate, and he has no real evidence, but yet we see throughout all of this, we see, this struggle against truth and darkness, and it's interesting to see how this unfolds.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe it'll be helpful to kind of get you into Pontius Pilate's mind. When you have these characters in history, they're people, and they have things that they're worried about that don't show up necessarily in the biblical text with some of the individuals. So Pontius Pilate is in a very precarious situation personally. Right? He's not connected in the way that most Roman officials are connected. Right? He doesn't have any really close family links. He's not related to anybody who's particularly powerful or notable. And so everything he's got, from his perspective, he's kind of had to work for. And one of the things he's afraid of is having it taken away. He's already gotten in trouble once. We have documents and things that show Pontius Pilate has already gotten in trouble once for mishandling the Jews. And it's kind of one of those things where if this happens again, you're not going to be the governor anymore. And he won't be for too much longer regardless. But he's kind of in this precarious situation where if there is another rebellion, there's already been one kind of uprising underneath him because he brought idols into the temple. And the people, there was a riot. And he threatened to kill them all, and the people said, fine, kill us all or take the idols out. And so he wound up having to remove the idols. And he gets in trouble. Rome actually writes him a letter and says, hey, you need to take care of these people. And so there's there's this tension underlying this whole situation that is really kind of forcing his hand to play politics in the situation. And so there's that kind of drama as the backdrop for what's going on here, that in the first century, you hearing about these things maybe would have been more familiar with, that we, 2,000 years removed, maybe don't know all the political intrigue that was going on in Judea in the first century. But that's the backdrop, is that you have the Jews who know that they've kind of got Pilate exactly where they want him. And you have Pilate who's trying to be a governor and do the right thing, but he also really doesn't care about Jewish people. Right? So there's all of these nuances of politics and personal feelings and resentment and bias and really racism. I mean, we would call it that today, more accurately probably tribalism, but that's present too. As far as Pilate is concerned, Jesus is a Jew, he's not a Roman citizen, and he can do to him whatever he wants. And it's all perfectly legal as far as Rome is concerned. So that's kind of the backdrop there.
Well, I like in verse 33, it's, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus, who told you this kind of thing? It's like he, and then I think that harkens back to he knows the Jews have had interaction with Pilate in regard to all this.
Yep.
He sent the troops.
Yeah.
I think Pilate was, the way he was questioning Jesus, it was not inevitable that he was going to convict him, because his questions appeared soft to the fact, well, he could have asked anything that would convict him quicker, but he says, what have you done that your own people have brought you in? So what you said makes so much sense, that he was in a bad spot, and he wasn't going to ask Jesus any questions where he would have to convict himself.
Right.
It almost seems as though Pilate's wanting Jesus to say something that would give him an opportunity to let him go.
Yeah, that King of the Jews, it's a loaded phrase. Mm-hmm. If Jesus just says, yes, I am, now he's seditious, right? He's a rebel. And now Pilate's, oh, great, now I can put you to death. And so that's, on the one hand, that's kind of what you're getting out of Pilate, is almost trying to trick him into giving an answer that will give Pilate an easy way out.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there's this curious element of, wait a minute, I've been governor here for a while, and there's this Messiah coming, this King of the Jews, this Son of David who is coming, who's going to deliver these people from the Roman oppressor. He knows exactly what is being expected. And now the chief priests bring the King of the Jews to him? This doesn't make sense either. And so on the one hand, I think Pilate he's really looking for that out. He wants to just deal with this and be finished. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, he's probably like, this is really weird. Why have they done this? And so you kind of see that struggle in Pilate.
Well, down in verse 37, Christ gives, for this cause, reason I was born, and for this cause I've come into the world. And it's like Pilate just cuts him off. What is truth?
Yeah.
It appears he doesn't let him even finish what he was saying there. He just cut it off. What is truth? Which is a great question, an awesome question, but I don't think that was really Pilate's goal in making that statement. I think it was actually a put down.
Yeah. And you can kind of, in that same vein of thought, in verse 37, before you get there, where Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world, you can almost hear this sigh of relief in verse 37. So you are a king. It's like, oh, good. Here's the way out. Here's how we're going to deal with this. And so Jesus then kind of answers, you say that I'm a king. And that really, that response from Jesus has caused people to ask a lot of questions. Well, how come Jesus here why isn't he just straightforward? Why doesn't he just say, yes, I'm the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? That would not have meant to Pilate what it meant to a Jewish audience. And so Jesus approaches it from this oblique angle. I am a king, but not the kind of king that you're thinking about. There is a kingdom, but it's not the kind of kingdom that goes to war with Rome, right? It's an otherworldly kingdom. It's not what you're thinking. And so Jesus has taken away the easy out. Pilate has to choose what he's going to do.
So what's the deal with this custom of them releasing somebody? It's like they had this agreement that they do this once a year with Pilate. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Did you have something before we move on to the custom?
If I don't buzz my, whoa, turn it down, guys. Okay, it's still loud. All right, I think the other thing to see in verse 37 is Jesus does respond, but he tells them what he tells everybody. It's about the truth. And if you know the truth, you know who I am. You'll listen to me and hear what I say. And I think that's past that point without us recognizing that he never, ever fails to make the truth clear for that person to hear.
Right.
And Pilate's response is, what is truth? Well, he just told them what truth was. I'm telling you what it is. So I think that's an important point as we go through this process. I think the other thing to remember that Caesar, I don't know if this was said earlier, does not normally reside in Jerusalem, but he had a history of coming to Jerusalem during Passover because the Jews had a history of getting goofy during that period of time. And the Romans of all things said, you basically, as I understood their rule, you let the people worship the way they want, the Jews in particular, but we don't want trouble. If we have trouble, it's on Pilate, it's not on the Jews. So it's the conundrum that he's a part of is interesting. And I think the further he gets into this, the more uncomfortable we see him becoming, condemning Jesus, which is another interesting thing as we walk through this process. When I was in high school, we had a rabbi come in and speak to us. So I asked the rabbi, I said, what do you think about Jesus? And he said, well, I think he was a good man. I said, so you think he was a good man that claimed to be the Christ? And he said, well, the Romans killed him, the Jews didn't. And I said, well, you need to go back and read the text. Because we see here the Jews are the ones behind this. And we see Jesus carrying it out. Jesus making, everything's happening not by accident, but on purpose to bring him to the cross.
Yeah, and your point, there's culpability. The way that he describes his kingdom to Pilate doesn't allow Pilate to merely pass this off as seditious uprising. Mm-hmm. He has to deal with who Jesus is, so that Pilate will become just as culpable as the chief priests, so that the Greeks and the Jews, or respectively, all humanity is here guilty before the cross of Christ. And so that's an important element too. He doesn't let him off. Yeah.
It's interesting that Jesus will be their judge.
Yes.
And here he's standing in all humility, as Paul writes in Philippians, in this humble sense before them. And Tim said he's told them the truth. And then it's kind of a mocking answer, what is truth? Of course, I don't know what Pilate really understood about all this. But.
Yeah, it's a hard question. Like if you were in a philosophy class, take Christ out of the picture. If you're in a philosophy class and your professor asks you, what is truth? Tell me what truth is. That's a hard question to answer. And the way that a Christian would answer it is the truth is Christ. It isn't this abstract, concept that you have to search up into the heavens to find. It resides in a person. It resides in Jesus. And so this retort from Pilate, what is truth? That's a very common way of dealing with this question when philosophers would argue about what is true and what is real and all of those discussions that you can read about in Greco-Roman philosophy. This is kind of a way of bringing it back down to get your head out of the clouds. Let's look at what's real. What is truth? And Jesus was sitting in front of him saying, I just told you.
Well, but it's interesting. He makes this retort back to Jesus, but then he immediately goes out and says, I find no fault in this man.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just interesting to see Pilate going back and forth to the Jews and saying, I don't see any fault in this man. There's no evidence.
Right.
But he's yielding to the mob eventually. He's just yielding to the Jewish mob because he is afraid. And to Tim's point, that's why the Antonio fortress was right next to the temple, because they were so worried about uprisings in Jerusalem, especially this time of year.
It's also interesting when you later on, when Paul is writing to Timothy, I think it's 1 Timothy 6, he refers to this conversation and says that Jesus Christ made the good confession before Pontius Pilate, evidently referring to what Jesus has said here, that acknowledging that he's a king, that his kingdom is not of this world, and that he came for the reason he came was to testify to the truth. And so it's just interesting that Paul calls it his good confession before Pontius Pilate.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to Barabbas. What does Barabbas mean? Abba, father. Bar, son of. So you have the son of the father. Is that a little ironic? Right? So you have these two people, one claiming to be the son of the father, one named son of the father, and you're given the choice. One is guilty and one is innocent. One is seditious and wicked and conniving and absolutely after his own self-interest. One is a servant of all who humbles himself and is willing to die for the sake of others while the other kills for the sake of himself. And you get this really interesting picture of two people, two separate people who are very different, but they're at the same time the same. Very different and the same. This should take you, with the cross kind of as a tree, right? This should take you all the way back to the garden where there is a similar choice made. Right? This is part of the image, and this is one of the ways that you can kind of see that God has had all of this planned from before the foundations of the world. So all of these elements that come together. Here is the choice. Which Adam? Which man? Right? And when you get into chapter 19, there's a very famous painting where you see Pilate presenting Christ to the people, and the title of the painting is Ecce Homo, or Behold the Man. Right? And the idea here is that you are being presented, all right, back in the garden, when God made the man, here they are. One is the earthly, fleshy Adam. One is the Adam that has come from heaven. Who will you choose? Who will you pick? And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the same choice that we all have to make. Who are you going to be like? Are you going to be like Barabbas? Or are you going to be like Christ? Are you going to choose to follow Christ? Or are you going to choose to follow the flesh? Pick. And it's an uncomfortable choice because you have to pick. And so that's what you're seeing. And before all the world, before human history, before God and all the angelic beings, they cry out, not this man, not Jesus, but Barabbas. That's powerful. And like we've mentioned throughout the class, there is culpability. They know what they're doing. Jesus, as Tim said, Jesus has spoken the truth. He's told them who he is. Pilate refuses to release him, and the Jews refuse to take the offer of clemency. Right? Pilate is trying to find a way out so that everybody can save face. Right? The chief priests can say, yes, he was guilty, and the only reason why he didn't get killed is because of that custom that Pilate has or the Romans have to let us. Right? Everybody can save face, and that's not good enough. And so that pushes us then into the next chapter.
Speaking of culpability, though, real quick, we just finished our Joshua study, and them crying out here does remind me a lot of when, Josh was imploring them to be faithful. They say, we'll do it, and then, he says, no, you won't do that. Yeah. There's a little echo of that here, I think.
Yeah. So the story is seamless. There's a chapter break, but when you read John, just pretend that the chapter breaks aren't there. John tells you when the story changes, right? He uses language like it happened after this or shortly thereafter. He gives you the breaks. So this is seamless. He goes out to the crowd. How about I release Jesus? And they say no. So he brings him in and he flogs him. And we were talking before class started about some of the understatements that appear in this story, in this telling of the gospel. And this is one of them. And it seems like it's not that big of a deal. But
No. I guess
intense.
in the first century, if you said you scourged somebody or flogged them, you would understand that. I don't think we today understand how many died from this. And it was a precursor to crucifixion, but it seems like Pilate was trying to do this to, like he's punished him severely. Won't they back away from their
yes.
demands? That's what it seems to me.
Yeah, he's humiliating him.
Because he goes out right after this and says, you know, he went, behold, I'm bringing you out to him that you may find, no, I don't find any fault in him.
Yep. And some people will ask, well, if he finds no fault in him, then why does he punish him? And it's because Pilate can do whatever he wants. He is not bound by any decorum. He is not bound by any rules as far as Jesus is concerned, because Jesus is not a Roman citizen. He can execute him for any reason. He can punish him for any reason, because Jesus is not a Roman citizen. And so when we read through this, we're like, well, why would he do that if Jesus wasn't innocent? And it comes back to what, or if he was innocent, it comes back to what you're saying. He's taking steps to see if, all right, is this enough now? Will you let him go now? And the answer will be no.
But the self-control that Christ exhibits, that's understated here too. He
Yes.
could have called down legions of angels to deliver him from all this. And this is, as bad as the cross is, this is terrible.
Yes.
It's interesting to also see that even the people that he should have been able to depend on weren't there for him either in certain situations. Like one of his own betrayed him in Judas, and then we see what happens with Peter later. And even most of us would have trust in the legal system that we're in, and he wasn't able to trust that either. So even the people that he was expecting to not be there for him, they weren't there for him, but the things he thought he could depend on went away as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. So he brings him out with a crown and clothed in a purple robe, mocking the claim that he is a king. And that actually, when you look at what's going on, is also fairly standard practice for people who tried to make themselves something. You would kind of have this mock coronation. And it didn't look exactly like this every time, but this is a pretty normal Roman thing to do, to mock the one who claims to be king. And so they're doing that. And again, what you kind of have is it's this culpability of all the nations, not seeing who Jesus is, not willing to listen to what Jesus is saying, and rejecting him ultimately as the king. And so there's an emptiness to those words, "Hail, King of the Jews." So Pilate brings him out, and in verse 5, you have those famous words. There's been countless works of art off that phrase, "Behold the man." John, the details that John gives you in his gospel are chosen on purpose. Right? He tells you at the end, he's like, there's a lot of things I could have written about, but I didn't because the books would fill up the world. So when he tells you that and you come back to the gospel, that indicates to you that whatever he did include was really important. So why would he tell you that Pilate brings him out and says, "Behold the man"? Why are those words important? Do you want?
You could argue this is going back to Zechariah, the branch, and behold the man. The same words come out, and it's in that same picture of God's plan to redeem.
Yeah.
John has a lot of those really subtle allusions, and then they strike us here. Yeah, I still think he's trying to, like you said, I think Pilate's trying to get out of condemning an innocent man, because there's other stuff in his mind going on, his wife's dream and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's in a tough position.
Well, just shortly after this, he says, "Behold your king."
Yeah.
And this is kind of a side note, but you read this and you read the other gospels, and of course Pilate sends him to Herod, and Herod sends him back, and you think this is taking days, and this is happening in a matter of a few hours. This is very fast-paced judgment.
Yes.
This is a very fast-paced trial.
Yeah, because he's trying to avoid
Yeah.
a rebellion,
Yeah.
right, an uprising. So he's moving quickly. Did you have
Do you think this is also the second moment in this discussion when we've been reminded that he is indeed human,
Yes.
that he is flesh? Because Jesus himself says, for this reason I was born and came into this world. So
Yeah. And John is written to kind of counter he seems to be writing to drive that very point home. For the Greco-Roman world, for a god to appear as a human, right, to show up, Zeus would do that, Hera would do that when you read through their stories. But they never became human. They would show up disguised as a human, never really becoming human. You couldn't cut them, they wouldn't bleed, they wouldn't, and they would go back immediately to their divine, status wherever they lived.
Yeah, because later on, he makes a big deal about Christ's death, piercing
Yes.
of the side, that he's truly dead.
Yes, he is God in the flesh, which to a Greek or a Roman is unthinkable.
Mm-hmm.
The gods were far away, different than us. And the claim of Christianity is that, yes, God is different, but he became like us so that he could redeem us. And people have tried to explain who is Jesus, how does that work? And I copied a quote from the best explanation that people have ever been able to come up with, other than just saying, well, he is who he is. So here is how it's worded. We acknowledge in Jesus two natures, unconfused, unchanged, indivisible, inseparable. The difference of those natures, so his humanity and his deity, being in no way removed because of their union together, but rather the properties of each nature are preserved, both concurring in one person and one hypostasis, not as though the Word was parted or divided, so in one being, one person, not as though the Word was parted or divided into two people, but one and the selfsame Son, the only begotten Word, Lord, Jesus the Christ, even as from the beginning the prophets have taught concerning him, and Jesus himself taught us concerning himself. So basically, what they have done is they're saying, we have no idea how this works. All that we know is that the way that Jesus presents himself, all those words mean he's God and man at the same time. And we have no idea how that happened. Right? And so when you don't know the answer to a question, you've taken tests before. You put a lot of words and hope it sounds like you know what you're talking about. That's what they did. They don't understand it. It defies understanding. How does that happen? You don't have to understand it to believe that it's true. When I was little, I didn't know how automobiles worked. They were magic. You put the magic stick in, you turned it, and voila, now you can go buy ice cream. I believed that every time my dad put the key in and turned it, the car would start. I didn't know how, I just knew it worked. There's still some truth to that today. I don't have to know how this happened if what and who Jesus himself claims to be is vindicated by his works. So if what he did and what God does in raising him from the dead, if that is true, then I can believe the testimony that Jesus offers about himself. I don't have to understand it. I just have to trust in the one who gives the testimony. Like when we go to court, if you have an engineer or a medical doctor or a psychiatrist or somebody who gives expert testimony, right, the court is trusting what they're saying, even though the jurors may not understand what the expert is telling them. They're just going to trust their opinion. We do that. We do that fundamentally every day in a variety of things, and when it comes to Jesus, I can't understand. If you want me to explain how this happened, if you want me to explain what it means for him to be both man and God at the same time, I'm going to give you that really wordy definition so it sounds like I know what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, all I know is that Jesus is who Jesus was. And I trust that because of what he did, what was predicted, and what he fulfilled. and his willingness to die for me, and his resurrection through the power of the Holy Spirit. That's what Christianity is founded on. And so I think that's exactly what you're seeing here, is God is fulfilling all of these things in the prophets through a person, through a human who is also divine, this Jesus. Yes.
I guess to add to that, they had all this concrete evidence that they're laying out now. They didn't choose to crucify him on that. They chose to crucify him on the fact from Leviticus 24:16 that he misused the name of the Lord. That today is like spitting on the sidewalks in Brentwood to get you murder one trial. But, you know, just some obscure, of all the laws in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, hundreds, maybe thousands of little things they could convict him on. They chose this one.
Yeah.
It's been a while in the library.
I find it interesting, you know, the Jews are saying because he made himself the Son of God, and when Pilate hears that, I think he was terrified. I don't think he's just afraid, he was terrified. And that's kind of back to their understanding of the gods, and if this truly was, he truly is the Son of God, he's terrified of what's going on.
Yeah, because that next verse, we would say he's sweating bullets, right? Because he hears that, and he says in verse 9, he goes back into the headquarters, and you kind of get the sense, maybe a little frantic too. Where are you from? You know, he's trying to really understand what's going on here. Because I think Tim said it very well. He's very uncomfortable with what's going on.
I think that it's interesting that Pilate had Jesus severely scourged, and then the Roman soldiers hit him in the face, and they put a crown on him and made fun of him, and then Pilate goes out and says, I don't find him guilty of anything. So he's just totally opposite what you would think. He had him beaten, and then he said he's not guilty.
I think the other thing not to miss, because Jesus has had all these discussions with the Pharisees and the scribes, hearing you don't hear, they heard every word he said. They're using those words against him, yet they're not realizing they're actually crucifying the Christ. Yeah. I think that's a very powerful part of this. They're speaking the truth, yet denying the truth at the same time.
I'm really amazed that Christ can even respond after being scourged. That's a minor point, but it's just after this kind of beating, and he's still having this conversation with Pilate.
Yeah. It kind of gives you a picture of the singleness of mind. Mm-hmm. He is intent on doing this. So you see in verse 12 of chapter 19, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. And at the end, you know, you had behold the man, and as you mentioned, then behold your king in verse 14. What shall I do with him? They say, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests answer, we have no king but Caesar. So he delivered him over to be crucified. Those are powerful words. And it goes all the way back, right, to Samuel, where they first reject God from being their king, and they want a worldly king like all the other nations. And here you see they're making the exact same choice. Right? They're rejecting the Messiah, the king who was to come. They're rejecting God from being king over them, and instead choosing a king from among the nations. And at this point, there is this image that has happened all through the Old Testament text, where God chose this holy nation out of Egypt, and they become just like the nations around them. Where at the end, God will even say, the prophets will even say, you're worse than the nations that God drove out of the land. And so here you have, before Christ, the leaders of the people of Israel saying, we're just another nation. Mm-hmm. We're just like everybody else. Caesar is our king, not him.
And they really put the squeeze on Pilate when they said that too, about, hey, if you let him go, you are not Caesar's friend. And I think at that point he realized, all right, I don't really have any other options here.
Yeah, we're doing this. That's exactly right.
We've seen through the text how people were followers of Christ were intimidated by the Jewish rulers, and now they're intimidating the governor
Yeah.
that if you do this, it'll get back that you're not a friend of Caesar.
Yep.
The politics have really gotten thick now.
Yes, they have. So they take him, the crucifixion, and we'll pick up with some of this when we get into next week also with the resurrection, some of the details of the crucifixion. But Pilate will come, and if you've ever seen a cross or if you've seen paintings where there is a cross and at the top there is a little scroll, and maybe you see the letters I-N-R-I. Right, so they'll be written in different languages, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And the I-N-R-I is the Latin letters, Jesus Nazareth Rex Iudi. That's what it stands for. Jesus of Nazareth, King of Jews. And so that if you ever see that, I-N-R-I, that's what that stands for. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It's the Latin initials. And so you'll see him write that, and then the people will protest, don't write that he is the King of the Jews, but rather he claimed that I am the King of the Jews. And Pilate's response is, I've written what I've written. Now how hateful and far off base do you have to be to even nitpick the wording on the death scroll above the man's cross? All right, you're dealing with very callous individuals. They've won. He's being crucified. But now that they even want it worded the right way. And Pilate, at that point, at least says something. No,
He showed a little guts at this point.
A little.
Yeah, a little.
Was it typical for them to have something over kind of showing,
Your
saying,
crime.
saying your crime? Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Some of the details we pick up in the other accounts throw some light on this. He knew, one of the accounts says that it was because of envy that they had brought him forward. And then you talk about their callousness when he washed his hands and said, his blood's not going to be on me. They said, let his blood be on us and our children. You know, they were completely rabid about this. And it comes through when you sort of get some of these other details from the other writers.
Yeah, and the early believers, like you can go to Acts chapter 4, the early believers saw this at the moment where humanity coalesces into one, and you have all humanity, the kings of the nations raging, right? The nations, the Jewish people, everybody is here together. They're enraged at the Son. They're pouring out their wrath on Christ, not realizing that it is his willing sacrifice that is there to take the wrath of God away from them. He is the propitiation. And so there's this picture there of that hatred, all the hatred and wrath that humanity can pour out, Christ takes, and he'll redeem us from that.
I find it interesting, these Jews are nitpicking the wording on that sign because of, we only have one king, and that's God. But they just said Caesar was our own king. So they're going through the religious things. They'll eventually want Jesus taken off the cross because of Passover. They're playing religion. They've forgotten. They have no heart, no mercy, and no understanding of what true religion is.
Yeah. And when we read through this, I have to try really hard to not say things like, oh, those people. I am those people. That's me. And if I'm honest with where I would have been, the best I would have been is Peter hiding by that charcoal fire saying, I don't know who that guy is. If I'm honest with myself and kind of where I would fall in society, I would probably have been one of the soldiers sitting at the foot of the cross gambling for his clothes. I am those people. And so we'll pick up there. We'll move from the crucifixion to the resurrection next week. Thank you very much for your attention and for all your comments.